The envelope arrived on the worst day of Marcus Webb's life, exactly 1 year after he'd buried his wife. His hands trembled as he stared at the return address from a law firm he'd never heard of, the crisp white paper feeling like a weight he couldn't bear. Inside was a single letter informing him that his late wife Sarah had made arrangements before her death, arrangements she'd never mentioned, and that he needed to come to their office immediately regarding matters concerning his 6-year-old daughter Emma. Marcus felt his world tilt sideways. What could Sarah have possibly hidden from him? What secrets had she carried to her grave? The grief he'd been struggling to contain suddenly mixed with confusion and a rising tide of anger that made his chest tighten. He looked across their small apartment to where Emma sat coloring, her dark curls falling across her face, the same way Sarah's had, and he felt something close to betrayal burning in his throat. If you believe in the power of truth, second chances, and the strength it takes to be a parent when everything feels impossible, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring more stories of resilience and love to people who need them most. Marcus had been barely holding things together since Sarah's death from cancer. Working double shifts at the warehouse while trying to be both mother and father to Emma had worn him down to his bones. There were nights when he'd stand in the shower and let the water hide his tears, nights when he'd check on Emma sleeping and wonder how he could possibly be enough for her. Sarah had been the heart of their family, the one who knew how to braid hair and pack lunches with encouraging notes, the one who could turn their struggles into adventures. Without her, Marcus felt like he was drowning in responsibilities he didn't know how to manage. The apartment was always messy now. Emma's teacher had gently mentioned she seemed withdrawn at school, and Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked a real meal instead of heating up something frozen. This letter felt like one more impossible thing being thrown at him when he was already underwater. When Marcus walked into the law office 3 days later, leaving Emma with his neighbor Mrs. Chen, he was ready for a fight. The lawyer who greeted him was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes named Patricia Morrison, and she gestured for him to sit in a leather chair that felt too expensive for someone like him. Marcus remained standing, the letter crumpled in his fist. He demanded to know what this was about. Why his wife had contacted lawyers without telling him, what she could have possibly done that required him to be here now when he could barely keep his head above water. His voice rose with each question, months of exhaustion and grief pouring out in accusations. Patricia waited patiently until he finished, then quietly slid a folder across her desk toward him. Inside were documents, but also photographs, dozens of them, that made Marcus sink slowly into the chair as recognition dawned. The photos showed Sarah throughout their relationship, but they weren't just family snapshots. They showed her volunteering at a children's hospital, sitting with kids who had cancer like she'd had, reading to them and holding their hands. There were images of her organizing fundraisers, pictures of her meeting with this very lawyer to set up something Marcus couldn't yet understand. Patricia explained in a gentle voice that Sarah had spent the last year of her life, even as she grew sicker, working on a plan. She'd known Marcus would struggle alone, had known he'd blame himself for not being enough, had known their daughter would need more than one exhausted, grieving father could provide. So Sarah had done something extraordinary. She'd used the small inheritance from her grandmother, money Marcus didn't even know about, to set up a trust fund for Emma's future and to arrange for help. Marcus listened in stunned silence as Patricia revealed that Sarah had interviewed and carefully selected a support system for after she was gone. There was Miss Rachel, a retired teacher who specialized in grief counseling for children, who'd agreed to spend time with Emma twice a week at no cost to Marcus. There was a meal service Sarah had prepaid for 6 months, home-cooked dinners delivered 3 times weekly so Marcus wouldn't have to worry about feeding his daughter properly. There was a college fund started for Emma with instructions for growth over time. Most incredibly, there was a series of letters, one for each of Emma's birthdays until she turned 18, and special occasion letters for her first day of school each year, her first dance, her graduation. Sarah had spent her final months writing these letters when she should have been resting, pouring her love into words that would guide their daughter through all the moments she'd miss. But the final part of Sarah's plan was what shattered Marcus completely. Patricia handed him a letter addressed to him, in Sarah's familiar handwriting, and he had to blink away tears to read it. Sarah wrote that she knew he'd be angry at first, that he'd feel she'd kept secrets, but she begged him to understand. She wrote that loving him and Emma was the greatest joy of her life, and her only regret about dying was leaving them alone. She couldn't bear the thought of Marcus sacrificing everything, burning himself out trying to be superhuman, destroying his health, and missing precious moments with Emma because he was drowning in responsibilities. She wrote that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom, that accepting support wasn't failure but love. She told him that Emma needed a father who was present and healthy, not one who was there in body but absent in spirit, because exhaustion had hollowed him out. Most of all, she wrote that she needed him to forgive himself for being human, to understand that he was already enough, but that being enough didn't mean doing everything alone. Marcus sat in that office and wept like he hadn't since the funeral, but these weren't just tears of grief anymore. They were tears of release, of understanding, of feeling seen by the woman he'd loved even from beyond death. Patricia gave him space, sliding a box of tissues across the desk and quietly stepping out. When Marcus finally composed himself enough to speak, he asked how he could possibly thank everyone who Sarah had arranged to help them. Patricia smiled and told him Sarah had already thought of that too. She'd left instructions that the best thanks would be Marcus taking care of himself, being present for Emma, and someday, when he was ready, helping another single parent who was struggling the way he had been. Sarah had believed in paying kindness forward, in creating ripples of support that would extend far beyond their small family. Over the following weeks, Marcus slowly let the support system Sarah had built fold around him and Emma like a safety net. Miss Rachel began visiting, and Marcus watched his daughter smile more readily, talk more freely about missing her mother. The meals arrived like clockwork, and Marcus found himself actually sitting down to dinner with Emma, instead of collapsing on the couch. He started working normal hours instead of double shifts, using some of the financial breathing room Sarah had provided. He read his wife's letters late at night and felt her presence guiding him, loving him still. Emma began to blossom, her teacher reporting that she was engaging more at school, making friends, laughing again. If this story has touched your heart, if you felt the power of love that extends beyond loss, please take a moment to like this video and share it with anyone who needs to know they're not alone in their struggles. Leave a comment telling us about someone who showed you unexpected kindness when you needed it most. On what would have been Sarah's 35th birthday, Marcus and Emma visited her grave with flowers. Emma placed her small hand in his and told him that Miss Rachel said Mommy was still watching over them, still loving them. Marcus knelt down and hugged his daughter close, finally understanding what Sarah had been trying to tell him all along. Love wasn't about being perfect or doing everything alone. Love was about building something strong enough to last beyond your own life, about trusting others to help carry the weight, about accepting that you were worthy of support and grace. Sarah hadn't kept secrets to hurt him. She'd planned in secret to save him, to save them both. And in demanding answers from that lawyer, Marcus had discovered the greatest truth of all, that he was loved beyond measure, that he'd never been alone, and that accepting help was the bravest thing a single father could do. As they walked away from the cemetery hand in hand, father and daughter together, Marcus finally felt ready to live again.